welcome back to my channel. It's me, Tara, and today we have a free pattern tryout that I want to do with you guys. I ended up finding this pattern from fabricstore.com. I was actually on the verge of buying a very similar pattern on Etsy, but as someone who spends a lot of money on sewing patterns that I never get around to using, my new process is always trying to find a free version that I can hack or that perfectly matches the dress style that I want to create. So I ended up finding this one via the web archive. It was kind of hard to find because I believe they no longer offer this dress pattern on their website. So if I can find the link again, I'll be sure to add it into the description box. But this dress, it has half sleeves with a kind of loose fitting bodice and a really voluminous gathered skirt, which is exactly what I was looking for. The only hack I'd probably do to this dress is adding waist ties, which we will attempt to do in this video. So with that, I have this kind of golden marigold yellow color, which is with some discontinued fall fabric that I got from Hobby Lobby for 75 cents a yard. So of course I had to make something out of it, and I figured it'd be great for springtime to make a lightweight long sleeve dress, which is what we're going to be doing with this pattern. So let's get started. All right, and the first thing we're going to do is go ahead and cut out the fabric with our pattern pieces. This dress actually comes with two front bodice pieces, one with a bust dart and one without, so you can choose. I personally am going to use the one with the bust dart. Since this is already a looser fitting dress, I just for my personal taste, I prefer the bust dart to kind of bring it in some. And so when cutting out your pattern pieces, you can pin it, or if you have pattern weights, I have these pattern weights I've made with just some leftover fabric scraps and dried beans and rice of all things. And they honestly work perfect for holding it in place without causing too much shifting. If you do decide to go with the front pattern piece that has the dart on the bust, be sure to mark that on the fabric before you remove the pattern piece from the fabric, just because it's going to be harder to try to get everything lined back up later on. I personally like to use pins or fabric markers, like the water washable fabric markers for marking. I know some people use chalk, but I've tried chalk on and off again, and I don't know, it really only works for dark fabrics for me. This dress honestly is so simple. It only has 4 pieces technically: the front, the back, the skirt, and the sleeves. For me personally, since this is a printed pattern, I did not want to spend all that paper and time printing out the skirt pattern and then piecing it together with tape. So it's honestly just a rectangle. So as you can see here, I just measured it out based on the measurements from the pattern itself on how big I wanted it to be, both length and waist wise, and I cut it along the selvage edge, and that honestly worked. We'll see the final product at the end of the video, but with such a simple shape like a rectangle, I highly recommend this, because printing and anyone that uses PDF patterns, the printing and piecing it together is honestly the most time consuming and difficult part. Okay, and we now have all of our pieces cut out. A few changes that I made was I cut out 2 of the bodice front, just because I had some extra fabric, and this home style fabric can be a little thin, and so I wanted a little extra opaqueness. I also used an old pattern template from a different sewing pattern to cut out some pockets that we're going to add to the skirt. And then just using my waist measurement, I cut out 2 waist ties so that I can attach those to the bottom of the bodice. This is a looser fitting dress, which I'm fine with, but I do on occasion like to make it a little more fitted. So this will be an optional kind of addition that I'll wear every other day or every now when I feel like it. Here, we're gonna go ahead and mark our bust on the fabric itself, one side at a time, just so it's easier. I'm using a pin here, and we're just gonna find that middle point based on my size. And then, like I said, I'm gonna have my fabric marker to mark where the pin is located underneath. And then I'm also gonna mark the edges with my fabric marker on where, because it's just one big triangle, where the end of the triangle meet on the side of the sewing pattern. And then using my ruler, I'm just going to connect those 3 dots in the shape of the V you're supposed to, and that's going to be where you sew for the dart. And you're going to repeat the exact same process on the opposite side as well. For bust darts, you don't want a backspace at the end when you start. You want to leave that kind of open because you're going to tie a double knot there once you're finished sewing the line. But at the end, you will backstitch just to make sure the threads don't come unraveled there. Of course, I did this off camera, but after you're finished with the bust darts, you're going to go ahead and sew your shoulder seams using a 1/2 inch seam allowance. And here, again with my customization, adding in waist ties, I'm just measuring about 2 inches up from the waist seam because I don't want the ties to get caught in the skirt, caught in between the skirt and the bodice. So I'm just making sure that they're high enough up that they'll do the job without causing any issues when sewing. And so measuring from there, you're going to place them on the sides and then sew up the seams as usual, making sure to double stitch or back stitch over where the ties are just to make sure that they're secure. Once we're done pinning everything in place, we're then going to go back to our sewing machine to sew up both sides using a 1/2 inch seam allowance. At this point, we can go ahead and test the fit, making sure that it's easy to slip over our heads and everything fits as expected, because if we're going to have to rip apart some seams, it's best to do it as early as possible. The next step is we're going to attach the button loop on the back. It's a 2-inch loop that they walk you through making on the instructions, and you sew it about a 1/4 inch right above the keyhole opening on the back side bodice. Alright, and with that, the next step is finishing the neck lining. The instructions tell you to do a bias bound facing, which is honestly my preference, although it's a little more tedious than just finishing it using its own, like folding over the fabric itself. But it gives a cleaner look. The only issue is, for some reason, I picked up a double fold bias tape instead of a single fold. So it did end up causing some complications later on, but we're just going to roll with it for now. You're going to pin it along the curve of the neckline and the keyhole on the outside facing part of the bodice, and then just stitch in the ditch, which will be about 1/4 of an inch. And as you're stitching around, always stop and make sure that it's perfectly aligned. That extra step is going to make sure that the bias facing lays down perfectly on the finished dress. So I've found the first major problem with this sewing pattern, or it could just be a skill issue for myself, which is why I'm unpicking the bias tape facing. I was already kind of winging it since I didn't have any single fold bias tape. I only had this double fold, but I don't know, but adding the bias facing all in one piece around the neckline and down the loop for the buttonhole in the back, it was just giving too many wrinkles and bumps because there's so many curves and sharp angles to go down the button loop. And it ended up, after I tried twice, it just looked so bad that I actually ended up last night unpicking the buttonhole and applying the bias tape to just the buttonhole, or excuse me, the keyhole in the back for the buttonhole. And it came out looking perfect. And this is usually how other sewing patterns with keyholes have me apply the bias tape facing, which is why I thought to try it. And it honestly just looks so much better. I need to trim this, ignore this. So now that that's worked out, I'm unpicking the half facing from the rest of the bodice so that I can get it covering the top parts here and stopping at these edges, and then finishing this off so that we can go ahead and start working on the sleeves and the skirt. So let's continue on. I'm very happy that this year, or this past year, 2024, I'm not gonna say fallen in love or romanticized, but I've come to fully accept that some sewing projects I'm going to need to unpick some seams. I've been sewing for maybe 4 years now, and I fought for the hardest to never unpick a seam. There are some dresses that I wear that I've sewn where it's a little too taken in at some points, it's not taken in enough at other points, but I refuse. I refuse to unpick a seam. It's just so tedious, it's so much work. But this is probably the second major project that I've had to do a lot of unpicking for. And it's just a part of growth. Once you just accept it, it becomes a lot less stressful. Now, looking at the final result, this honestly looks so much better. I don't have any footage of what the original facing looked like when I made the mistake of trying to do it all in one, but this came out looking so clean, so seamless. And right now it's just pinned, but I just went ahead and got this in the video just because it just looks so seamless. And I was so happy with the fact that I did all that unpicking and it came out so much better. And so with the neckline finally done, we can go ahead and add on the sleeves. Sleeves are pretty basic. They usually come in with one pattern piece that you cut out for both sides. Sew up the side seam, hem it, and then attach it to the bodice, which is what I'm doing here. Next up, we have our second fit try on, just to make sure, since we're done with the top of the dress now, just make sure that everything fits well now that I've added on the sleeves and everything else. And since the top fits very well, we're happy with it, we're gonna move forward with the skirt now. Again, I ended up just cutting out a giant rectangle. So taking our rectangle, I'm marking where the pocket pieces are going to go. The original pattern does not come with pockets, but for woven dresses like this, it's really easy to add pockets. So just like the waist ties, I'm measuring about 1.5 inches, 2 inches down from where the waist is going to be. And that's where we're going to sew the pocket pieces in. And once the pocket pieces are sewn, I typically sew about 1/4 inch smaller than the seam allowance. So with this having a 1/2 inch seam allowance, I sewed them in at 1/4 of an inch. Once they're sewed in, pressing them technically right sides together with the seam facing outwards, we're just going to sandwich the 2 skirt pieces together, ironing and smoothing, and then pinning everything in place to again sew down each side with that 1/2 inch seam allowance. Now that we're done sewing up the side seams, we're now going to work on the rest of the skirt. Typically around this stage, you would go ahead and hem the bottom of the skirt panel, but I cut mine along the selvage edge of the fabric, which is just a finished edge that comes on factory manufactured fabric that doesn't unravel. So it saves you a bunch of time if you can find a way to incorporate it into a garment that you're making. So I don't have to finish the edge. So we're just going to focus on gathering the skirt. So you're going to do 2 rows of your longest basting stitch on the waist part of the skirt panel. And once those in place, you're just going to pull them gently as possible because you don't want to break the thread, and move those gathers evenly around the skirt as much as possible. You want to make sure that it is not only even, but gathered to the size or the circumference of the bottom of the bodice piece. And here you see everything matches up in terms of circumference, and I've pinned everything together so that we can go ahead and make our final stitch attaching the top and the bottom. And with that, again, it's just going to be a 1/2 inch stitch all the way around, unless you've done some personal measurements and you want yours to be a little bit higher on your waist. There you have it, guys, another successfully completed pattern. Despite the issue with the biased neck tape facing, the dress was actually very easy and very quick to put together. The style itself is very flowy and very fun. I can honestly see myself making a lot more of these in the future, maybe changing out the fabric, which is another benefit of this dress. It truly is a blank slate for hacks and variations, such as you can change out the sleeves. Instead of doing the long sleeves, you can do a half sleeve or an even shorter sleeve for the summertime. You can swap out the neckline for a V-neck or even a mock neck. You could change out the length of the dress, the bodice. The fabric is another great choice. There's truly so many things that you could do to this dress to change it up. Which, if you're interested in pattern hacking, stay tuned. I planned on releasing a series on different pattern hacking techniques so that you can take mass-produced sewing patterns or even indie sewing patterns and make changes here and there so that the pattern or the fabric the pattern or the garment you're making can better fit your style. Otherwise, this dress was definitely a win for me. The fit's great, the color is wonderful, and I'll probably be wearing the heck out of it as well as the other ones I make in the future. So with that, if you guys liked the video, please don't forget to like on your way out and subscribe, and I'll see you guys for our next project.